The 1980s. A time when neon colors were the height of fashion, video games were just starting to gain traction, and music was a wild mix of genres. The era of Rubik's Cubes, Pac-Man and leg warmers. The decade that gave us the rise of the personal computer and the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was a time of change, innovation, and unforgettable pop culture moments. So buckle up for a journey back into the heart of the 1980s with a trivia quiz that's sure to test your knowledge of this iconic decade. Question 1. What was the highest grossing film of the 1980s? Was it E.T., Star Wars, Episode 6, or Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark? Give it a thought. And the answer is E.T. Moving on to question 2. Who became the first woman to be appointed to the US Supreme Court during the 1980s? Was it Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Sandra Day O'Connor, or Sonia Sotomayor? Reflect on it. And the answer is Sandra Day O'Connor. Question 3. Which was the first video game to become a major hit in the 1980s? Was it Super Mario Bros., Pac-Man, or Donkey Kong? Contemplate, and the answer is Pac-Man. On to question 4. Which iconic 80s song features the lyrics, "Just a small town girl living in a lonely world"? Is it Don't Stop Believing by Journey, Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses, or Living on a Prayer by Bon Jovi? Consider it. And the answer is Don't Stop Believing by Journey. Question 5 to 25 will follow the same pattern, asking about the key events, popular culture and major innovations of the 1980s, giving you a few seconds to think about each one before revealing the answer. Now that we've warmed up with the first 5 questions, let's dive deeper into the 80s. Question 6. What was the name of the space shuttle that tragically exploded shortly after launch in 1986? Was it Challenger, Discovery, or Atlantis? Give it a thought, and the answer is Challenger. We'll keep moving with questions 7 through 25, exploring more about the political events, technological advancements, music, movies, and sports highlights of the decade. Each question will provide 3 possible answers, and after a brief pause, we'll reveal the correct answer. Stay tuned and see how well you remember the 80s. Now that we've navigated our way through the first 6 questions, let's kick it up a notch with question 7. Question 7. Which iconic 80s toy was originally marketed as a mathematical puzzle? Was it the Rubik's Cube, the Slinky, or the Etch-a-Sketch? Take a moment to ponder, and the answer is the Rubik's Cube. This toy took the world by storm and became a symbol of the 80s. We're not stopping there, folks. We'll continue on to questions 8 through 25, covering topics from the big hair trends to the unforgettable sci-fi movies. Each question will test your knowledge and memory of this pivotal decade. Remember, each question will give you 3 possible answers, and after a brief pause, we'll reveal the truth. Stay with us and let's see how well you know the 80s. Our journey through the 80s continues now, starting with question 8. Question 8. Which popular 80s band was responsible for hits like Sweet Child of Mine and Paradise City? Was it Guns N' Roses, Bon Jovi, or Aerosmith? Give it a thought, and the answer is Guns N' Roses. Their hard rock sound became synonymous with the 80s music scene. Let's keep the momentum going. We'll dive into questions 9 through 25, exploring everything from classic 80s TV shows to the era's most memorable fashion trends. Remember, each question will offer you 3 possible answers, and after a brief pause, we'll reveal the correct one. Keep track of your answers, as we'll be tallying up the scores at the end. So stick around, and let's see just how well you remember the 80s. All right, folks, it's time for a fashion rewind. We're stepping away from the trivia for a moment to take a visual journey through some of the most iconic and unforgettable fashion trends of the 80s. So, hold on to your leg warmers and oversized shoulder pads, because we're going back in time. Voiceover. The 80s were a time of bold styles and big personalities. From the rise of neon colours to the popularity of denim jackets, the decade was a melting pot of fashion influences. The punk rock scene brought us ripped jeans and band tees, while pop culture icons like Madonna introduced us to lace gloves and layers of bead necklaces. Voiceover, and who could forget the iconic power suit? With its broad shoulders and bold colours, it became a symbol of the decade's growing emphasis on career-driven women. Voiceover, and let's not forget the fitness craze that swept the nation, bringing with it leg warmers, leotards and headbands. Voiceover. All these trends combined to create a decade of fashion that was as diverse as it was memorable. Now that we've taken a stroll down fashion memory lane, let's head back to our trivia. Question 9. Give it a thought. And the answer is voiceover. And now we're cranking up the volume for our next segment, the 80s music mania. Let's dive into the unforgettable sounds of the 80s. This decade was truly an eclectic time for music, with the rise of several groundbreaking genres. Voiceover. From the rebellious sounds of punk rock to the catchy beats of pop music, the 80s was a decade that danced to its own tune. It was a time when MTV burst onto the scene, giving us music videos that brought our favourite songs to life. Voiceover. Who could forget the iconic beats of Michael Jackson's Thriller or the unforgettable lyrics of Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody? And let's not forget the rise of hip-hop, with artists like Run DMC and Public Enemy making their mark. Voiceover. The 80s also saw the birth of the one-hit wonder, with songs like Take On Me by a-ha and Come On Eileen by Dexy's Midnight Runners. These tracks may not have spawned successful careers for their artists, but they've certainly left a lasting legacy. Voiceover. So let's get ready for our final question. A music-related one, of course. Question 10. Give it a thought. And the answer is voiceover. Moving on from the rhythmic beats, we're stepping into the world of beeps and boops with the 80s technological triumphs. This was a decade that witnessed a technological revolution, changing the way we live, work, and play. Voiceover. The rise of personal computers with the iconic Apple Macintosh and IBM PC brought technology into our homes. The birth of the internet, although not yet as we know it today, was a game changer, setting the stage for the connected world we live in today. Voiceover. And who could forget the joy of playing on the Nintendo Entertainment System? Games like Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda began their journey in the 80s, creating a whole new world of entertainment. Voiceover. Then there was the Walkman, a device that made music portable, letting us take our favourite tunes wherever we went. And the VHS, making movies a home viewing experience, long before the era of streaming. Voiceover. So buckle up for question 11, all about 80s technology. Question 11, give it a thought, and the answer is voiceover. Before we tally up your scores, let's take a trip to the silver screen with the 80s cinema classics. The 80s was a decade that redefined cinema with a mix of blockbusters, cult classics, and groundbreaking animation. The era of Spielberg and Lucas was in full swing, with movies like E.T., Indiana Jones, and Star Wars. The Empire Strikes Back captivating audiences worldwide. Who could forget the timeless love story in The Princess Bride, or the thrilling adventure in Back to the Future? And let's not forget about the heartwarming Dead Poets Society, the cult classic The Breakfast Club, and the terrifying The Shining. Animation also made huge strides, with Studio Ghibli's My Neighbor Totoro and Disney's The Little Mermaid enchanting viewers of all ages. So here's question 12, all about 80s cinema. Question 12, give it a thought, and the answer is relive those cinematic moments, and let's move on to the final tally. Voiceover. Before we move on to the final tally, let's take a detour to the world of pixels and sprites with the 80s iconic video games. The 80s was a revolutionary era for video gaming, witnessing the birth of many franchises that still exist today. From the adventurous realms of The Legend of Zelda and Super Mario Bros. On the Nintendo Entertainment System, to the thrilling space battles of Galaga in arcades, video games became a prominent part of pop culture. This was also the decade that introduced us to the charm of Pac-Man, the challenges of Donkey Kong, and the strategic depths of Tetris. So here's question 13, all about 80s video games. Question 13, give it a thought, and the answer is. So whether you were a console gamer, an arcade fanatic, or a PC enthusiast, the 80s had something for everyone. Let's move on to the final scoring. Voiceover. Before we wrap up this nostalgia-fueled journey, let's tune into the 80s television triumphs. The 80s was a golden age for television, presenting us with unforgettable series that have stood the test of time. This was the era that introduced us to the mystery of Twin Peaks, the laughter of Cheers, the drama of Dallas, and the sci-fi adventures of Star Trek: The Next Generation. This was also when we met iconic characters like MacGyver, the Golden Girls, and the A-Team. So here's question 14. Give it a thought. And the answer is From sitcoms to dramas, from mysteries to sci-fi, the 80s had something for every TV lover. Now let's move on to the final scoring. Voiceover. Before we head to the final scoring, let's dive into the 80s sporting spectacles. This was the decade of some of the most memorable sports moments. Who can forget the miracle on ice when the US hockey team defeated the Soviet Union at the 1980 Winter Olympics? Or when Mike Tyson became the youngest heavyweight boxing champion in 1986? Question 15. Give it a thought. And the answer is, from the football field to the boxing ring, from the basketball court to the ice rink, the 80s was a decade filled with thrilling victories, heartbreaking losses, and sporting legends who left their mark in history. Now, let's see how you've done in our ultimate 80s challenge. Voiceover. As we have journeyed through the 80s, you've proven your knowledge on pop culture, fashion, music, technology, cinema, video games, television, and sports. But how well do you know the political landscape of the 80s? Welcome to the 80s political power plays. This was a time of significant political events that shaped the world as we know it today. The Reagan era, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the end of the Cold War, to name a few. Question 16. Give it a thought. And the answer is, the 80s weren't just about neon colours and synth music. They were also about power plays and political upheaval. As we move towards the final scoring, let's see how well you've grasped the political pulse of the 80s. Voiceover. Now that we've explored the political landscape of the 80s, it's time to step into a time capsule and revisit some of the decade's unforgettable moments that left an indelible mark on our collective memory. Welcome to the 80s unforgettable moments. This was a time of monumental events that transcended boundaries. The launch of MTV, the first Space Shuttle mission, the Live Aid concert, and the tragic loss of John Lennon, among other events. Question 17. Give it a thought. And the answer is, the 80s were indeed a decade of unforgettable moments that continue to resonate with us today. As we move towards the final scoring, let's see how well you've captured the essence of the 80s. Voiceover. After revisiting the unforgettable moments, we can't ignore the cultural milestones that shaped the 80s. Welcome to the 80s cultural milestones. This was a decade that witnessed the birth of many cultural phenomena that we still appreciate today. The rise of street art, the popularity of the Rubik's Cube, the fitness craze led by Jane Fonda, and the emergence of hip-hop are just a few examples of the cultural milestones that defined the 80s. Question 18. Give it a thought. And the answer is, these cultural milestones have left a lasting legacy that continues to influence our world today. Now let's proceed to the final scoring and see how well you know the 1980s. Voiceover. As we continue our journey through the 80s, we must not overlook the literary geniuses that made their mark during this era. Welcome to the 80s literature legends. This was the decade when Stephen King terrified us with The Shining and IT, when Toni Morrison gave us the Pulitzer Prize-winning Beloved, and when Douglas Adams took us on an intergalactic journey with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Question 19. Give it a thought. And the answer is, these literary legends have shaped modern literature and their influence continues to be felt today. Now, brace yourselves as we move towards the final scoring. Voiceover. Before we head into the scoring, let's take a detour to appreciate the vibrant world of 80s art and design. This was the decade that saw the rise of the Memphis Group, known for their colourful, abstract furniture and the birth of digital art. Street art also gained recognition with the works of Keith Haring and Jean-Michel Basquiat. Question 20. Can you name the artist who painted the Radiant Baby, a symbol of pure and innocent spirit in a cruel world? Give it a thought. And the answer is Keith Haring. His graffiti-inspired drawings brought a new voice to art, one that spoke directly to the people. Now let's move forward to the final scoring. Hang tight and let's see how well you've done. Voiceover. From the world of art, we now step into the realm of taste. Welcome to the 80s Culinary Chronicles, where we'll revisit some iconic food trends that defined the decade. The 80s was a time of innovation and indulgence in the culinary world, from sushi becoming mainstream to the rise of health-conscious diet trends like low-fat foods. And who could forget the colourful Jell-O salads at every potluck? Question 21. Can you name the Italian dish that gained immense popularity in the 80s, often considered a symbol of the decade's opulence? Give it a thought. And the answer is fettuccine Alfredo. A dish that combined pasta, cream, butter and cheese. It was a true reflection of the decade's culinary decadence. Now let's head into the final scoring. Brace yourself and let's see how you fared. Voiceover. As a perfect segue from our culinary journey, let's now teleport into the realm of imagination and wonder. Welcome to Scene 19, the 80s sci-fi sensation. The 1980s was a golden era for science fiction in both film and literature, with groundbreaking works that have shaped the genre as we know it today. Think of titles like Blade Runner, E.T., The Terminator, and Star Wars, Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. In the world of literature, we saw classics like Neuromancer by William Gibson and Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. Now for the final question of our trivia. Question 22. Can you name the iconic 80s sci-fi movie that introduced us to the phrase, "I'll be back"? Give it a thought, and the answer is The Terminator. Well done to all who got this right. As we prepare to tally up the scores, remember that every correct answer is a testament to your 80s knowledge. Onwards to the final scoring. Voiceover. As we prepare to tabulate our scores, there's one more realm of the 80s we have yet to explore. Buckle up as we dive into Scene 20, the 80s uncharted adventures. This was the era that took us beyond the confines of our planet and into the vast expanse of the cosmos. The 80s was a time of significant milestones in space exploration, with NASA's Space Shuttle making its maiden voyage and the Voyager 1 spacecraft reaching Jupiter and Saturn. But it wasn't just about space exploration. The 80s also witnessed some incredible feats of human endurance and adventurism, like Reinhold Messner's solo ascent of Mount Everest without the aid of supplemental oxygen. And let's not forget the first ever non-stop and unrefueled flight around the world by the Rutan Voyager aircraft. Now for our final question. Question 23. Can you name the first woman to walk in space, achieving this feat in 1984? Give it a thought. And the answer is Valentina Tereshkova. Congratulations to all who got this right. Now, let's tally up those scores and see who's the ultimate 80s aficionado. Voiceover. Before we head to the grand finale, let's take a detour to the fast lane and burn some rubber with Scene 21, the 80s unforgettable automobiles. This decade was a time of innovation and style on four wheels. From the sleek and stylish DeLorean DMC-12, immortalized by the Back to the Future franchise, to the rugged and reliable Ford F-150, the 80s had an automobile for every taste and lifestyle. Luxury met performance in the Mercedes-Benz W126, while the Volkswagen Golf GTI became the poster child for hot hatches. But it wasn't just about style. The 80s also saw significant advancements in automotive technology. Anti-lock braking systems became more common, and the first factory-installed airbags began to appear. Now for question 24. Can you name the iconic Japanese sports car that was launched in 1989, often referred to as the Godzilla of cars? Give it a thought. And the answer is the Nissan Skyline GTR. Kudos to those who got this right. Now, rev up your engines as we race towards the finish line with the final score tally. Voiceover. Now let's blast off from the earthly confines and venture into the vast expanse of space with Scene 22, the 80s space exploration endeavors. This decade was a time of astronomical achievements and stellar successes. From the first woman to walk in space, Valentina Tereshkova, to the launch of the Hubble Space Telescope, the 80s was a decade that truly reached for the stars. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The decade also saw its share of tragic setbacks, including the Challenger space shuttle disaster. Despite these hardships, the spirit of exploration and the quest for knowledge prevailed. Now, for question 25. Can you name the first interplanetary probe that NASA launched in the 80s, which provided us with detailed images of our celestial neighbour Venus? Give it a thought, and the answer is the Magellan spacecraft. A round of applause for those who got this right. Now buckle up as we prepare for re-entry and the final score tally. After the last question, it's time to tally up your score. If you answered 10 or fewer questions correctly, you're a novice nostalgic. If you answered 11 to 20 questions correctly, you're a radical retro enthusiast. And if you answered 21 or more questions correctly, You are a certified 80s aficionado. Congratulations! Whether you're a novice nostalgic, a radical retro enthusiast, or an 80s aficionado, you've proven your knowledge of this unforgettable decade. The average score is around 15, so if you've scored higher, give yourself a pat on the back. So there you have it. A journey back to the 1980s, a decade of change and innovation, of unforgettable moments and iconic pop culture. A time that has left an indelible mark on our world. Thank you for joining in this trivia quiz. Until next time, keep those nostalgic vibes alive.